The Volga German settlement of Messa, whose Russian name is Ust-Solicha, was considered a model colony. In contrast to other colonies, the majority of Messa's first settlers came from the same principality in Germany, namely Isenburg. This was fortunate and resulted in very few conflicts between the settlers. This harmony among the colony's first inhabitants helped them to quickly settle in their new home. Their cohesion also helped them deal with the Russian government in a well-organized manner, protecting their interests. As an example, the control authority for foreign settlers decided in 1775 to introduce joint liability in the settlements, meaning all community members would be liable for illegal actions or neglect of duties by individual residents. The settlers objected and organized an uprising. Unfortunately, it was crushed by the authorities and its instigators were beaten as punishment. Initially, all the residents of Messa were successfully engaged in farming. They sowed wheat, rye, oats, barley, millet, sunflowers and hemp. They also tried growing corn for a short while, but quickly gave that up due to very poor yields. The Messa settlers lived their everyday lives with enthusiasm and inventiveness. For example, a settler named Reed is said to have invented kisyak, a mixture of dry dung and straw that was cut into pieces and replaced wood as a heating fuel. However, a resident from another colony also claimed he had invented it. But when it came to building houses, the residents of Messa faced a dilemma. The first houses were made of wood, and soon, due to the settlement's rapid growth and development, nearly all of the few trees in the area were cut down. Messa's residents then bought wood from the nearby colony of Schilling and later began building almost exclusively with stone. Much of Messa's historic town center has been preserved to this day. The congregation built this evangelical Lutheran church beginning in 1911. The church square, the church, the former pastorate and the school building, which now houses a library and a cultural center, show the organized structure of the historic town center. The pastorate was built 15 years earlier than the church, near the old wooden church that was dismantled before the new one was built. The congregation was delighted with the new church. Its sophisticated style, appropriate spatial proportions, fine details, and elegant brick decoration of the walls. It is said all the local resources were scraped together to build the church, but the residents could afford it. At the beginning of the 20th century, Messa was a rich colony from its traditional agriculture base and more recently developed industries. It became famous for the fine cotton fabric sapinka and was a leader throughout the Volga region in the production of cotton clothing. In 1894, more than 600 residents made sapinka fabric. The production was concentrated in the hands of three manufacturers, Borel, Schmidt and Reinecke. In addition to their home colonies of Balza, Messa and Kutta, they founded factories throughout the Volga region. Shortly thereafter, the Schmidt Brothers Trading Company and an agriculture machinery factory were established in Messa. Yet the residents of Messa faced a number of trials. Epidemic of cholera and smallpox flared up again and again. The epidemic of 1892, which broke out immediately after the famine year of 1891, was particularly deadly for the community. The epidemic claimed approximately 500 lives across the Volga region. When the devastation finally ended, the town instituted a holiday, Cholera Day, which was celebrated on the first Friday after the 1st of September as a remembrance that the epidemic had been overcome. 30 years later, under the Soviet regime, Messa saw another famine, but this time the disaster was on a nationwide scale. According to an eyewitness, Pastor Eichhorn, the residents collected animal carcasses, ground them up and cooked the bones in order to at least somehow feed themselves. There were also reported cases of cannibalism. During this difficult time, utilizing their reserves, the church played an important role in supporting the parishioners. But the Soviets were not the least bit thankful for their contributions to the fight against the famine. Instead, they used the hunger as an excuse to expropriate the church's assets. They began a campaign to confiscate church property poverty, deprived the church of its sources of income, and repressed the clergy. For example, the pastors Liborius Böning in 1931 and Eduard Hermann Eichhorn in 1932 were arrested and banished from the colony. The church congregation was dissolved in 1937. Since then, the church building has served as a warehouse and cement factory, the traces of which are clearly visible on the interior walls. The church has fallen into disrepair, but even in its current condition still attracts tourists and history buffs of all kinds. However, not everyone came to Mesa voluntarily. Since the beginning of the 19th century, the so-called stage, the transport route for prisoners, has passed through Mesa. The Mesa town authorities were responsible for supervising the prisoners as they moved through the settlement. The town still bears this stigma. A re-education work colony is right in the center of Mesa today. But even the years of crisis did not destroy the essence of Mesa's former beauty. The poet Eduard Huber, who was born here and was the first to translate Goethe and Schiller into Russian, wrote the following lines about his homeland. The wise sons of distant Germany, they followed Russia's call here. It lured them with the Volga's gifts, with forest, with valleys, wide open spaces. There is a village there, I remember vividly. It lies on a broad green riverbank. There, church bells sounded joyfully and reflected on the stormy waves.